Games, whether they're video games, board games, role play, they take place in our minds. We might see representations on a screen or on a board or plotted out on a map, but the game is in our heads. That said, for good or for ill, we are not just our minds, we are also our bodies. Or as our next speaker might say, we are also meat. A game designer for his studio FourbitFriday, this talk will help channel some theories about the physical essence of our bodies into the worlds of play we inhabit. Please welcome to the stage Tyriq Plummer.
Hello, I'm here to talk about meat. Flesh, bone, blood, nerves. If you know who I am, then this may be a topic you've heard me talk about before. If you don't know who I am, then allow me to introduce myself. I am Tyriq. I make games. I've worked as a pixel artist and animator on a bunch of different stuff over the years. I've also made a bunch of game jam games. I've been working on a game called Catacomb Kids for about 50 years, give or take. I love procedural generation, and so should you. And I also make music from time to time. I guess I've just got a lot of creative energy in me, a lot of artistic juices flowing. So there's my introduction, but that's all just the stuff that I've done. That's not what I am. So let me tell you about the real me. Not like the real me, like, oh, my emotions and aspirations and dreams or whatever, but like the real me, the physical me that actually exists and occupies space, this fleshy corpus. 6 foot tall, 200 pounds-ish, a couple bones broken and long since healed, 60% water, allegedly, although let's be honest, it's probably less than that because staying hydrated is kind of a chore. Sans appendix, less one wisdom tooth than I started with, imbued with whatever gene it is that makes cilantro taste like hot garbage. Art is what I make. Games, I make them. Making things is what I do. But what I am before anything else is meat. Before one can have thought, culture, belief, action, before any of these things, one must first have form. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. The physicality of existing and how that physicality can be better represented in games. So what exactly does it mean to have a body? Well, it's kind of gross. If you're a cool kid, then you may have noticed that the title of this talk is borrowed from a famous short story by Terry Bisson called They're Made Out of Meat, which recounts a conversation between two aliens marveling over the fact that the dominant species of life on Earth is made entirely out of meat. And we communicate by quote unquote flapping our meat at each other or squirting air through our meat. And I read this story as a kid, and it really enamored me not only with the idea of science fiction, but also this idea of the physicality of humans, the juxtaposition of us as these creatures with infinitely complex interiority, but still somehow dependent on these gross, excretory, fleshy, wet, meat-flapping, air-squirting, feet-having bodies. Gross. We're gross. Feet are gross. Part of that grossness is just due to how much we've got going on inside. We're 206 bones all squuzz up in a bunch of different muscles, weaved through by apparently several dozens of miles of nerves, which is pretty wild, and a bunch of organs, all held together by this weird sac that's constantly dying and replacing itself, which is to say that we're made out of parts. Many different parts, all working together. A handful of them are necessary to stay alive, and many more of them are needed in order to live comfortably. But a lot of them, you can kind of take or leave. Their damages can be adapted to, reckoned with. That 206 bones, 640 muscles, that's what we usually are. Usually we're that, but things happen. Things happen like you get some teeth pulled out, or your kidney starts stopping working right. Or I might have my appendix try to kill me for no reason. I'm not mad. Things happen like just being born different or being born at all. Human bodies are diverse in both form and experience. My body is not your body. Hell, my body today is barely my body from 10 years ago. It hurts more. But we've all got different strengths and weaknesses, and even though we may have some overlapping ailments, overlapping abilities, The Venn diagram will never be a circle. My aches and pains are not your aches and pains. And speaking of aches and pains, another thing that comes with having a body is aches and pains, damages, hurt. As diverse as we all are, this is one commonality that we all share. We are breakable. In fact, being breakable is such a core aspect of being a person that it's what a huge proportion of games tend to revolve around. The challenge of remaining physically unbroken while in the presence of fireballs and hammers and dinosaurs and bullets, and dinosaurs spitting fireballs and shooting bullets and throwing hammers. Regardless of what form a game's mechanics may take, many otherwise peaceful games even still have an element to them of preserving one's own physical well-being. Like, it's a calm, chill game where you're not killing anything, but you still can't fall too far or you'll die. Or like maybe it's a farming game where you have to not touch the thorny plants because they'll stick you. So we're breakable, but we're not only like just breakable, we're imminently breakable. We are to some extent fragile. Breaking a self is easy to do. There are so many things that can go wrong in a human body without much difficulty. Physical traumas are easy to come by. Everybody trips, everybody falls. A few years ago, I was at home descending the stairs that I traverse multiple times every single day, doing nothing out of the ordinary, and just had what I can only call a motor skill unforced error. I took a step, my foot did a weird thing for no reason, bada boom, bada bam, I fractured my foot just from stepping wrong. And I ended up writing a song about it later anyway. I was home and all alone, was no one there who saw. Take 2 steps and then step wrong, twist my all and fall. I get messed up. I like heard the crunch of my foot as it happened. It was weird and disconcerting. And that's not even getting into the effects of extreme cold and heat, infections and diseases, our need to do things like eat, sleep, drink. But we can't even do nothing safely, like idleness. I have to be careful not to use my phone too much anymore because the last election cycle, I was doom scrolling so much that it gave me a repetitive stress injury that made my hand feel like it was on fire every time I scrolled through Twitter. For months, my hand would hurt if I used my phone for more than just the briefest period of time. But fortunately, only for months. I stopped using my phone so much and started doing regular wrist stretches, and now my hand is not on fire. My broken foot healed, and I have been on high alert for further motor skill betrayals by my own body, but it healed because I am meat, and meat is resilient. Breakable, yes. Fragile, yes, but resilient. We're made out of parts, and those parts can fail and be lost, but the whole continues. We break easily, but we can be restored, and what can't be restored can be adapted to. So, we're gross, we're made of a bunch of parts, we're different from each other, and even across time from ourselves. We are breakable, fragile, and resilient, and it is a combination of these elements which I think comprises the core of the physical human experience. Take one away and you're left with Superman or a robot. I guess except for the gross part, that's pretty subjective. Video games, right, video games. Video games have people in them most of the time, a lot of the time. Human people, human adjacent, elves and dwarves and stuff, people. And that makes sense. Being people is a perspective that I imagine most of us are familiar with, to perceive the world with the human mind, to engage with it from a human body. And there have been great strides in representing the human mind in games. Our fears, our cultures, our singular, shared, familiar, and foreign experiences. But before thought, there must first come form. There must first come meat. So how do we do this? How do we better represent the vast range of human vitality in games? Well, one thing we can do is investigate some of the many ways that health has already been represented in games. Here's the part where I talk about the game that I made, Catcom Kids, that thing I've been working on for 60 years. It's a platformer roguelike with all the things you'd expect from a platformer roguelike: procedurally generated levels, gathering of loot, gaining of power, and of course, death. But it also has a fairly standard sort of health system. You have a certain amount of hit points, and when you get hit by something, that number goes down, and when it hits 0, you are dead. This is video games. If you're trying to represent a not video game, but you want it to seem very video game, this is how you do that. Put some floating health bars over the heads of people in a photograph, and it instantly reads like a video game. Health bars, hearts, floating numbers, these are all well-worn shorthand for unreality. They are a complete abstraction of what it means to possess a body. And so abstraction is what we'll call this first way to represent health in games. Living creatures don't actually have hit points, but abstractions of health can be incredibly useful. They make things easy to understand, make cause and effect readily grasped, let players plan more effectively by abstracting away confounding variables like how much blood do I have left in my body, or how much force can my ribcage take before it breaks. If a player knows that a boss's attack deals 3 damage and they have 8 health left, they can navigate the world with much more confidence and foresight. An abstraction goes beyond just representing how many hits a character can take. It can also be something like the status effects in JRPGs. Being poisoned isn't vomiting and shitting yourself. It's a number dropping by a little bit every turn. Being frozen isn't undergoing the stages of hypothermia and then experiencing multiple organ failure. It's just having to skip your turn because you're frozen. Abstractions of health are basically those systems whereby characters essentially lack all aspects of meatness, aside from perhaps that death is possible. And through abstraction, bodies are not treated as a collection of parts, but as some inseparable whole where an injury to any part is an injury to all parts. Often with abstracted systems, players are mechanically identical at both 100% health and 1. Or if there is some mechanical change, it will have no resemblance to the actuality of being human. For instance, Mario. In most of the 2D Mario games, you can get up to 3 hit points, 3 strikes before you're out. 1 for your outfit, 1 for your size, bigness, and a last one to kill you. But what does that even mean? These are not consequences that correlate to the human form. My clothes don't fly off when someone smacks me. I don't get smaller. They're fun consequences. It's not like it's bad game design, and I don't think Mario needs to be able to have a heart attack. But he could be anything. He doesn't need to be a human at all. He could be a featureless orb, and the mechanics of health and dying would make just as much sense. So that's abstraction. That's video games. But what are some other ways that human physicality has been represented in games? One of the games that really opened my eyes to the fun of video game meat was a roguelike called Ivan, or Iter Vehemens ad Necem, which I know I'm pronouncing wrong, but it's Latin, it's a dead language. What are they going to do about it? Ivan is a traditional turn-based roguelike. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but I found myself really interested in the way injuries work in the game. The player's body is separated into 7 different areas: head, body, groin, left arm, left leg, and right leg, each of which has its own pool of HP, which means that if your arm takes too much damage, it will be destroyed or cut off. And if you take too big a hit to your head all at once, you might die instantly. Locational damage in games is nothing new, but before Ivan, I had only ever seen it applied to enemies or mechs and robots, zombies. This was the first time I had played a game where I, as a human, not a cyborg or anything, but as a human, could undergo those same sorts of traumas. When you lose a limb, there's no sparks or metallic clang. You just leave a splash of vibrant red on the ground, just like me in real life. It's not at all realistic. You don't have to worry about bleeding out or anything or going into shock, and it lacks the complexities of trying to accurately represent the whole spectrum of human vitality. But it gets a little closer, and it's simple. So we have another way of representing humans as meat in games, which is to simplify. Simplify what it means to be a body. Simplification acknowledges that humans are more than just a hitbox, that we have more at stake than just restarting at a checkpoint. The cost becomes change, fighting, failing, but surviving and emerging different. While abstraction makes no concessions to human physicality, simplification recognizes that at least some of the truths of being meat made. We are parts, and we are fragile, and we are resilient, and we are diverse. Playing Ivan still doesn't feel like you're controlling a human, but it had a more relatable fear, not one of death, but of survival almost. And I liked it, so I stole it. In Catacomb Kids, my game, when you get struck by an axe or a sword or by the Reaper's giant scythe, you might just lose a limb. It doesn't have the same health per limb mechanics as Ivan, but, you know, it's just based on chance. There's a chance you'll lose a limb. But after adding the ability to lose limbs, it opened up a new resource for me as a developer, a new thing for me to threaten against the player, a new consequence. And that's one of the things about representing the meatness of a character in this less abstract way. It's not just about survival now, it's about the potential cost even upon victory, a cost that is both meaningful and lasting, one that changes the character, changes how they approach situations, their priorities, how they navigate the world. In a literal sense, they can't move the way they used to if they're missing a leg. So, abstraction and simplification. But what else? Well, Dwarf Fortress remains the best example I can think of a game going well beyond a simplified representation of meat. Another game descended from the roguelike evolutionary tree, like Catacomb Kids and Ivan. Dwarf Fortress does away with abstraction almost entirely and enters the realm of simulation. Not only can your arms and legs be broken and severed, as in Catacomb Kids and Ivan, but your brain can be bruised. Your lungs can be pierced. You can have items lodged in your flesh, and there are even pain values associated with certain types of injuries. If your heart is punctured in Dwarf Fortress, you don't die because your HP reaches 0. You die because your blood loss becomes too great to sustain your life any further. I still love this quote from Dwarf Fortress's wiki page about wounds. Guts. Damage to the gut causes great pain and nausea. Creatures will vomit and then retch repeatedly depending on how much damage was caused. This slows down the creature and can dehydrate them. When guts are pierced, they may spill out of the wound. This causes a lot of bleeding and exposes the guts themselves as a target for aimed attacks. Slicing off the exposed guts causes heavy bleeding and almost always death. Almost always. The cut off guts can then be picked up and used as a weapon. Simulation goes above and beyond the expected representation of human physicality in games. It strives to do more than just enhance the sense of meatness, but it unifies your character with the laws of the world that they inhabit. The line is blurred between what is a part of them and what is a part of their world. Where does the self stop and the laws of the wider universe take over? There is no line. They are the same. They're not only in the world, but are held together by it and torn apart by it. This is what simulation means to me, employing the nuances of physical existence to blur the line between characters and the worlds they inhabit. So abstraction, simplification, and simulation. Now, I've labeled these degrees of representation up top, but they're more like axes. Each of these categories mixes and mingles with the others to greater and lesser degrees. Games with largely abstract health systems might be supplemented by the suggestion of hit location, as in a lot of first-person shooters, or games where a player is represented as a breakable being, a mutable collection of parts, but also existing alongside a more familiar abstract hit point system, like in Catacomb Kids. There are games like The Long Dark and other survival sims that skew towards the simulation side of simplicity, and others still which straddle the line between simplicity and simulation while still having abstracted elements. And there is a fourth sort of hidden axis of representation, although it's less of an axis and more like a, I don't know, encompassing field that goes over all of these to some degree, which is narration. What is the story that is being told about these bodies? What is the impact that these wounds have, not just on a mechanical level, but on an emotional level, on a character level? To some degree, it is impossible to escape the narrative aspect of representation because by itself, ooh, I got hit, kind of tells a story. I got shot. But there have been games that also try to emphasize this axis, this field over all the others, where narration is not subservient to action, but is the impetus for it. It's the driving force behind it. Games like MUDs and tabletop RPGs have been exploring the narrative dimension for decades now. Games that ask, after a player, for instance, loses an eye, not only how does this affect my character mechanically? Has my accuracy dropped? Has my vision radius thinned? But how does this affect my character in all the ways that losing an eye would affect a character in their position, with their station, with their skills, with their history? More recently, there have been many narrative games about body image, transition, and acceptance. Acceptance. So far, I've mostly been talking about how damage is sustained in games, the breaking of meat. But there's a whole other side of this equation, which is the aftermath. How we heal how do we adapt? After the damage is done and the danger is past, what then? There's an old saying that time heals all wounds, but this is rarely ever present sentiment in games. You're always looking for a med kit or popping a healing potion or yelling for a cleric. And Catacomb Kids is in this category too. Restoring your severed limbs is as simple as drinking a potion of regeneration. The limbs grow back a bit weaker than your original limbs and also blue to sort of indicate that a semi-permanent change has occurred. But the solution to any injury is always an active and fairly immediate one. Drink potion, get better. Cast spell, get better. Active healing, do thing, get better. Video games. But time is supposed to heal all wounds, not potions. So where then is the waiting, the bed rest? Sleep is often a means of recovery, but a single night of sleep didn't heal my fractured foot. It took time. In many roguelikes, spending some turns standing idle will gradually replenish your health, but usually roguelike health systems are already so abstract that this waiting mechanic doesn't really go too far in representing any kind of human need. And even when sleeping to heal is present, games always seem to have a method of recovery that makes time irrelevant. And I'm not suggesting that games should start featuring long hospital stays after every gunfight, but for the time cost of injury to be so unavoidable in reality and so scarce in games is curious. It's not like there haven't been games that revolve around the passage of time before. Shenmue, Majora's Mask, the Harvest Moon games. What if you could get kicked by a horse and black out for a day or spend a month in a hospital, which would make you miss out on the most valuable resources that we have as mortal human beings? Time. Time to sow, time to harvest. The game Sifu begins to approach this aspect of physicality, sort of aging the player after they get defeated every time, but it has like a mystical theming around it that's kind of undermines the humanness. Lastly, there's just dealing with it, accepting that whatever injuries your meat has sustained, whatever scars you've received, they're just a part of you now. To adapt, recalibrate, move on, move forward through a new normal. Old obstacles become new challenges. Maybe they're overcome again with some ingenuity. Maybe they aren't, and a new untrodden path is necessary to be blazed. But we persist until we don't. So humans are gross, but we're incredible too. I like us. Despite everything, I still like us. But I find myself relating to the aliens from Terry Bisson's story. We're made out of meat? That's ridiculous. Who let this happen? But here we are, and here we'll keep being. And also, despite everything, I still like video games. They allow us to share in perspectives not our own. to act as through the body and minds of others. And in doing so, hopefully to come to a better understanding of some meat that isn't us, some people that aren't us. And I've been speaking until now as people as meat, our parts, our physical qualities on the most general scale, because that does interest me. I find it fascinating. I want to play more games where I'm fearful and breakable and forced to live with the consequences of my failures and shortcomings, but somehow still continue and grow beyond them. But people are obviously more than meat. People have hates and loves, hurts and friends and memories. Not every story starts with 206 bones and 640 muscles and 40 miles of nerves, or however much it was. Not every story starts young and free of prior consequence. And so I want more of that. I want more, old people in games. I want to know these stories. I want to better understand them and see them represented. And we are getting that a bit with the cultural aspect of games, people making autobiographical games and that sort of thing. But yeah, I want to understand you. I want to understand all of you, including the meatness, the physical aspect of it, in all our glorious shapes and sizes and ages. And that's it.
We are meat. And we're also more than that, too. For all of the discussion of power fantasy that often shows up in games, thinking about the physicality of our human bodies gives us a way to change the context in some very real ways when we think about our games. This talk seemed to tread that line between the beautiful and the grotesque. It's a thin one, but it was fun to explore. Thank you so much for your talk, Tyriq.